Hello, I'm Reverend Sharon Plant. I'm an assistant curate to Pioneer in the Diocese of Leicester. I'm based at St Anne's and St Paul with St Augustine in the city. I've had limited contact with refugees and asylum seekers up until September last year when I found myself with a lovely couple from Iran who had come to Leicester and came along to church. So I was the first minister that made contact with them. Our incumbent was on sabbatical at the time. And so after the service, I spoke to them at the door and they explained their story to me briefly and told me that they were seeking asylum from Iran because they'd converted to Christianity. They'd spent some time since May last year in a hotel in the West Midlands, but then been moved into a flat in our parish. And so I think the first thing that they wanted me to do for their upcoming interview was to write a letter in support of their application for asylum. So I was happy to do that, absolutely. But interestingly, my incumbent's partner is a refugee from Iran. And so I thought the first thing to do was to try and make some contact with him because it's a familiar face, familiar language. He'd been through the process. And so that happened quite quickly. And it kind of felt like I was sharing the load a little bit, not taking it all on my shoulders. And then the next week, I invited them to have lunch with me. I think quite quickly it felt like it wasn't just me doing my ministerial stuff. It felt like friendship and, true compassion and wanting the best for them. And I just really wanted to get to know them and know how I could support them. So I invited them over to lunch, and then they sort of told me a full of story of what they'd been going through and what life is like in Iran generally, but also especially if you're suspected of being a Christian or converting to another faith. So following that, I was able to write a letter of support for them because I knew more and I felt I understood them better. Um, and then as well as them coming along to church services, they started coming to another project that I've got going called the community allotment. And they were very good at getting stuck in and being busy. They were really grateful for having something to do. I think sitting in home and doing jigsaws and not really having money to spend, etc., was hard. So getting out in the fresh air and meeting other people and feeling purposeful was really helpful for them. Um, so between that and the church community who were actually really welcoming, at this time of year we had a lot of emphasis about migrants and small boats and that kind of thing going on in the news, but actually our congregations were very welcoming and very accommodating. And so they started. So between the church community, which was very welcoming, actually they were accessing both the churches in the benefice at this time because they both offer different things. But between those communities and the community allotment, they started to find their feet and feel like they were more part of the wider community. So other church members were supporting them by inviting them around for meals, giving them clothes, helping them to fill in forms, that kind of thing, as well as, just being really nice and sociable and welcoming. In the end, they needed a third interview, and so again, I was able to offer another letter of support. That was much easier because I knew much more about their story and their faith story. Around that time, we'd got some confirmations coming up in church, so I explained to them what it was and invited them to be part of it, and they jumped at the chance. So we had a great service in December, along with two other people, and one of the couple plays the guitar, and so he was invited by our suffragan bishop to take part in an intercultural Christmas carol service, which he jumped at. And then finally, we heard that they'd got leave to remain for 5 years. It was funny actually at the time because I felt the stress of waiting for that answer. I was so invested in them. So it was a real relief. And then that threw up another lot of circumstances because then, of course, they're released from sort of home office provision and needed to find a home. They were at risk of being homeless. Um, and they were told by our council housing department that they needed to go and sleep on the train station at night, and somebody would come, uh, hopefully, and would take people from the train station to some kind of temporary accommodation. Fortunately, uh, they only needed, they only spent a weekend with my incumbent before having somewhere to go to. And that came about because of one of the members at the allotment whose neighbour had a property for rent. And by the grace of God, somehow or other, it has worked out that they were able to move into this bungalow for not a lot of money. And it's in a very nice area. It's a very nice house, and they're safe. And, you know, between sort of everybody working together, that's come about. Um, and they've recently, so they're trying to get their lives sort of on track now. So they've got a home, they're thinking about jobs. The guy is training as an electrician. He needs to work out how he's going to manage to get to college, that sort of thing. But by not eating all the time or not eating a lot all the time that they were in the Home Office accommodation, they saved enough money to buy a car. And so now they're waiting to get their driving tests. They've had a couple of lessons each just to get them up to the British standard. Um, so I guess the main thing to say, oh, and the guy who plays the guitar, he now plays regularly in church for us. But I think the main thing to say about them is that they're hardworking and they did a lot of things from on their own initiative. And it was a whole network of people really that supported them, and not just me. And then just very quickly, we've got a new member to the allotment who's from Brazil. He's only 21. His family are part of a drugs cartel. So he's next in line to be part of that inheritance and doesn't want to be. He's been refused leave to remain, and he's got an appeal in May. Um, but yeah, so it's becoming more of a situation, I guess, for us in this part of the city. And we've got some good organisations, but yeah, I guess it goes to show the place that churches have to play a role in people's lives. Sorry, my phone's binging.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That's I think I half know the answer to this question, but what is it the church has gained by engaging in this.
Yeah.
And you've obviously gained something, I guess, personally at the church.
Mm.
You've got a new guitar player, but
We got a new guitar player, yeah.
other ways that you've that the church has gained, Sharon.
Um, just because they bring them and their, their gift of their personality, their outlook on life. Yeah, hearing some of their stories or even just their perspectives that have got nothing to do with sort of trauma or politics, helps us all to think about things differently, to be more aware of our language and our assumptions when we're talking to people and about people and in preaching, which we're good at anyway, but it just does kind of make you think, oh, actually, that wouldn't resonate with them, or what can we do to make something more pertinent for them?
Mm.
So it's the gift of them, really.
Mm.
They are the gift.
Well, a lovely way to end. Thank you, Sharon, very much for sharing that. Really, really appreciate that. So thanks.
Thank you.
Nice that you're here, Stephen, from Cork. So my name is Rita.
And I'm John, and we live in the far west of Cornwall. So very, very different from Leicester. We're in a very rural part of Britain, which traditionally hasn't had an awful lot of immigration, refugees. So that has itself been a discovery for us. Our experience of refugees is twofold, really. Firstly, Rita, who for very many years was working alongside Andrew with the resettlement programme when 8 Syrian families were settled in Cornwall. More recently, we've had a different approach to refugee work, which is through the community sponsorship scheme. So we can talk a bit about both of those.
Yes, thank you. I think if we start with the community sponsorship scheme, so that was actually our whole family deciding together to support the family. And in Cornwall, there were about 4 sponsorship families, so it's a really small number. And in Truro, there was no community sponsorship families. So
what happened? We were in the very fortunate position that I worked all my life in the NHS, and I got a lump sum, and we had a choice of either having a large lump sum and a smaller monthly pension, or vice versa. And we did our sums, and we worked out that the only way we'd be able to buy a house would be to go for the large lump sum. We talked about this with our children, thought it was a good idea, and then approached the local community refugee scheme. Now, the problem for community refugee schemes is that they build up a fantastic network of support and willingness, but without a house, nothing can be done. So our new colleagues and friends in Truro had been fundraising for years and years and trying to A, raise awareness, B, raise money, but with very little success or hope of success. So we waltzed along, having done none of this hard work, none of this community building, but just in this very fortunate position of having a sum of money which we offered to the sponsorship scheme. So they were delighted. We thought that would probably be the end of the matter. Unfortunately, fortunately, it wasn't. We found ourselves at a sort of later stage in our career, and me in retirement. We found ourselves suddenly in the position of becoming landlords, which we hadn't kind of factored in at all. We'd somehow thought that if we offered this money as almost as benefactors, we could then withdraw and do very little else. And that's not how it is in reality. which is good because, of course, we've become much more involved with the family. It has been difficult being landlords. We've never been that in our life, and fixing roofs and windows and all of this, but that comes to it, I guess. One thing which we did want to say about the community sponsorship scheme is that it is a real success. It's been going. We have a family of a mum and her 4 children from Iran, Afghanistan, who became refugees when her husband, who had worked in Afghanistan for an American company, he was imprisoned and her life was in danger. So they fled to Pakistan and were in a refugee camp. But they have been such a lovely family to welcome and to work alongside. But what I thought was really impressive about the Truro refugee group was that they were quite boundaried from the start, that the Home Office had a list of families and applicants who could have been put into this house with the support which was offered. And it seemed that the Home Office was offering families with hugely difficult needs. So, for example, one was a Somali mum and dad who were in their 60s with one son who had schizophrenia. Now, the thought of having to, knowing the NHS as I do, the thought of Cornwall's NHS managing a 30-year-old man with Somalia and no English, it just wasn't going to work. And so the group, we were able to sort of hold out and have a certain amount of choice in who we felt we could support and where it would be a bridge too far. And luckily, the family who did come were people whose needs the skill set of the volunteers could meet. Mm. So that was really good. I think the experience that Rita had with the resettlement program was perhaps more challenging than that. I think that a lot of the Syrian families who did come to Cornwall had particular difficulties in terms of education, rural backgrounds, which I think perhaps we weren't completely, or the scheme wasn't completely prepared for.
And I think the Home
or Cornwall
wasn't prepared for that, because the community sponsorship scheme changed their mind as well. They used to just send families to groups, community groups, and then without a choice. And I think they learned that didn't work. Unfortunately, because I am very sure that the families we were offered wouldn't have worked, partly because of the rural setting, no group support from other people from the same nation, but particularly like in the case of the Somali person with schizophrenia, the NHS wouldn't have been able to cope with that in Cornwall. However, because we ended up with a family with 4 children and a group of volunteers who were mainly primary school teachers and had an enormous ability to work with the schools, which again don't have, I mean, it will be different in Leicestershire, but in Cornwall, the schools weren't used to having Muslim children at school. There were only a very few. I mean, it's changing a lot, I have to say, but there used to be only one Muslim child in the whole school, in the whole secondary school. So the school's still finding it hard. And because there have been some experience with the Syrian refugee children who came before, schools are getting better. However, I have to say that it is just wonderful because the family, the mother is a midwife and couldn't work in Afghanistan because, of course, the Taliban didn't allow her to work. So you have to say that her husband has, has disappeared. So that's very difficult for them. And the children are really young. When they arrived, they were between 3 and 11. But they're all at school. They're all enjoying school. Their English is amazing, and the mom now has a job as a teaching assistant at a secondary school, which means that she can be there, and it's very hard for her, but she can work full-time at the moment with 4 children. If she was working as a midwife, she couldn't, because as a single parent, you can't possibly do the 12-hour shifts. Plus her qualifications don't count. So, but if I think about the amount of support that's needed for a family for it to work well is enormous, because we have 10 really active volunteers that do school pickups, that do English lessons, that do work with the schools, that take them on outings because there's no car. In actual fact, it only works well because of the enormous amount of support. So I have to say the volunteers are totally amazing. Going back to the resettlement program, and Andrew is very well aware of that, Cornwall never had a refugee family. So Cornwall Council suddenly had to learn how to deal with refugee families. They also hadn't really got experience of working with people from a different religion. And we were asked, Cornwall Faith Forum brings together people from different faiths, so the Baha'i, the Buddhist, the Christian, the Jewish, the Muslim, the pagan community, and I've probably forgotten one. But we together were asked by the Muslim community to support the Syrian families coming to Cornwall. And the council really wasn't prepared for that in Cornwall, really. They learned very well, but it was really difficult. So this was an example of the Muslim community asking the faith forum, other faith communities for help. And we had 40 volunteers to support 8 families. And that actually was really hard because Cornwall wasn't used to it. The families had lots of previous trauma before the war started. So there was a lot of trauma. Quite a few of the people that came couldn't read or write Arabic, and therefore to learn English when you can't read and write your own language is enormously hard. And the fact that for example, that the people, the men who came weren't allowed to work first, they were allowed to work, but they weren't supported in that. That would have been better. Made the start of their settling into Cornwall really hard. And I have to say that 10 of the 8 families, 5 have moved out of Cornwall because of the community being too small for them. So and 3 are very happy. And I think in a community sponsorship scheme, what's better is because there is one family with so many volunteers, they are really settled and really feel at home in Cornwall. That also has to do with the level of education. So that's a wonderful experience. And
the same question we put to Sharon: what have you, as a couple, as a family, and the wider community gained from this experience? What have you gained?
Well, thanks, Andrew. Those very open questions are always quite hard to. I think I was really pleased. It sounds a bit strange. I kind of hadn't expected this sum of money from the NHS, and my first thing to think was like a pass the parcel with a bomb inside it. I just wanted to drop it. I didn't know what to do with it. But I had a very fortunate career and I was well paid and for that. And I didn't feel that I somehow needed or wanted this lump sum. So it felt very good to be able to try and use that sum of money, perhaps building on things which I tried to do as a doctor, and which we tried to do through Rita's work as well, to put that money to some use. So it felt personally that it was good to make the right choice for the particular family. I think a little bit like you said, Sharon, it brings the sorts of problems which we hear about on the news into such an immediate personal realm. To see this lovely mum and 4 really lovely children, and to know the situation that they had been, and to get to know them now not just as refugees but as people in their own right. But in order to get to know them in their own right, somehow that kind of that journey through the refugee framework had to happen and had to be in place. So in a way, it all feels sort of rather precarious and rather fragile. But it has been really lovely to. So personally, it's yeah. We now, when we go to Truro, there are nice people to meet. There are four semi-wild children with all their enthusiasm. It has been lovely.
Yeah,
And Rita, what about the Faith Forum? What was it what did they gain from the supporting? What was the positive?
well, there's two things. The Faith Forum gained, I think, was the fact that the faith communities work very close together, because the Faith Forum had to really, with people from different faiths, work on quite a lot of pressure. So then you find out how you can closely work with people who are quite, maybe you feel are different from you, on the pressure, and that done really well. So I think it made sure that the Common Faith Forum was a very practical faith forum. Rather than meeting for tea and coffee in the Common Council building in a room, you meet because someone needs to go to the doctor, or a baby was born. So we did actually have babies born that we would then be at the birth, because there's no one else, because they didn't have any family. So you're on call to go to the hospital for a birth to happen. So that's quite amazing. But I also just want to say, Andrew, I think we learn not to make assumptions. And I think that's, in contrary to what you hear in the news, where we always get taught to have opinions about everything, you learn these opinions aren't worth anything, because the reality is very different, and you just have to be the willingness to learn a lot. And one of the things, for example, was that we thought, okay, the lady probably wants to meet other people from Afghanistan and Pakistan and be in a community, and so let us introduce them to the one other people we know in Truro, because it's just not very diverse. And I was saying to her, oh, so we meet up with this other family, and I was even not really listening to her. I was almost walking out of the door, assuming she would say yes, and she said, no, I don't want to. So I turned around, realized I hadn't been listening very well. Then I had to listen very well and realized that, no, she didn't feel safe. It was unsafe to meet people from Pakistan, or her perception of unsafety. And she felt much safer in Cornwall precisely because it's people that were different that she could trust, because she had been in such an unsafe situation. So to learn not to make assumptions, I think, is a real gift and that's also from the Syrian families and from our Afghani family, and that makes I'm really grateful for that learning, being able to learn and not to make assumptions, and learn that you might sometimes be mistaken.